Barron Trump's polite request was met with sport, but the room set the moment Melania arrived. The morning sun streamed through the altitudinous glass windows of Pinecrest Financial Bank in town, San Diego. It was the kind of place where every face lustered, and the air was thick with the hum of effectiveness. The tellers at their stations were sprucely dressed, their exchanges cropped and professional, as guests filtered in and out with purpose. Just before 10 a.m., the heavy oak doors swung open. A youthful man, altitudinous and perfectly dressed, in a acclimatized cortege suit with a crisp white shirt, stepped inside his polished shoes, clicked vocally against the marble bottom as he walked, with quiet confidence toward the frontal counter. His hair was neatly nominated, his posture straight, and his presence commanded attention, though not in the way one might anticipate. Barron Trump, now a youthful adult, approached the counter with a slight smile. He carried himself with the kind of calm confidence that could only come from someone used to the limelight but apathetic in exhibiting it. As he reached the counter, he glanced at the nameplate of the teller before him. Sandra H. Good morning. He began politely, his voice steady and regardful. I'd like to open a new account, please. Sandra slightly glanced up, giving him the formerly over, with an expression that landed nearly between objectiveness and dubitation. Do you have an appointment? She asked, her tone cropped. I do not, Barron admitted, his smile unchanging. But I was told I could speak to someone about opening an account. Sandra soughed aloud, tapping her pen against the counter. Her eyes dallied on him, and for a moment it sounded like she was calculating whether he was worth her time. Behind her, two other workers changed knowing ganders, one of them murmuring commodity under his breath that made the other stifle a laugh. Barron remained perplexed, though. He was easily apprehensive of the atmosphere shifting around him. Is there someone available who can help me? He asked calmly. Sandra eventually looked him in the eye, and for the first time, her expression carried commodity, suggesting misprision. We're a relatively busy moment, she said flatly. Perhaps try cataloging an appointment coming time. We're not then for drop sways. Barron blinked, the corners of his mouth tensing just slightly. He reached into the inside fund of his suit jacket, pulling out a satiny leather portfolio. I've all the necessary documents right then, he explained, his voice still polite, but with a hint of firmness. Now it should only take a many twinkles. Sandra slightly glanced at the portfolio before letting out a sharp breath. Look, she said, lowering her voice slightly. This is not the kind of place where you just walk in and anticipate immediate service. We feed to a certain clientele. There it was, the inferred assumption, wrapped in a veneer of professionalism, but trickling with judgment. Barron still didn't blench. I understand, he replied, his tone measured. But I believe this is exactly the kind of place I am looking for. Still Sandra was not budging. She signaled vaguely toward the exit. I suppose you might be more comfortable at a different branch, perhaps nearly further accommodating. But what happened coming would ensure that everyone in that room would flash back this day for a long time. The air in the bank sounded to grow heavier as Sandra's dismissive tone echoed across the quiet lobby. Barron stood there for a moment, his calm address unwavering. His eyes darted to the other staff members behind the counter, who were now openly brooding and staring, easily enjoying the unfolding scene. One of them, a youngish man with a name label reading Kyle M., leaned toward Sandra and rumored commodity under his breath. Whatever it was, it made her lips twitch into a trim smile. Sandra turned back to Barron and lifted her head, as if sizing him up formally more. Here, she said, her voice espousing a patronizing lilt. This is not the kind of place where we deal with casual walksways. Perhaps you did not read the sign duly on your way in. Barron's brows furrowed slightly. I am sorry, did I miss commodity? He asked, his voice still calm, but with a slight edge of disbelief. Kyle, who had been wiretapping, suddenly chimed in. Yet, chum, he said loud enough for others to hear. This is not one of those banks where you just show up and suppose you will be handed a free checking regard you need to. You know, meet certain qualifications. Barron's aspect shifted to Kyle, his expression neutral, but his posture slightly more rigid. I see, he said. His voice indeed, and what qualifications are those? Kyle signed, leaning back in his president with a trim grin. Let's just say the kind of people we generally deal with. Do and walk by without an appointment. Sandra chortled vocally, easily inspired by her co-worker's words exactly. We have a certain standard then. She added, it's nothing particular. Of course. Barron took a deep breath, glancing around the lobby. The other guests were now subtly watching the commerce, their curiosity piqued. Many of them changed uncomfortable looks, but none stepped in. Barron turned back to Sandra, his jaw tensing ever so slightly. I understand that you are busy, he said, his tone steady but firm, but I do not suppose my request is unreasonable. If there is someone differently I can speak to, maybe a director, I'd be happy to stay. Sandra's smile faltered for a moment before she recaptured her countenance. Our director is unapproachable, she said snappily, and actually, we do not have time to explain our programs to every walk-in who comes through the door. Kyle chortled again, and this time, Barron's eyes flashed with commodity that looked like disappointment. Rather than wrathfulness, he sluggishly closed his portfolio and slid it back into his jacket. For a moment, the room sounded to hold its breath as he stood there, looking at Sandra and Kyle, as if learning their faces. Thank you for your time, he said eventually, his voice low but pointed. Without another word, he turned and began walking toward the exit. But just as the glass doors began to close behind him, the bank's atmosphere shifted in a way no bone could have prognosticated. The glass doors had not indeed swung shut behind Barron when a satiny black SUV pulled up just outside the bank. The vehicle was understated, yet incontrovertibly precious, its presence drawing many curious ganders from passers-by. From the passenger side, Melania Trump stepped out with the kind of royal grace that incontinently commanded attention. Dressed in a climatized cream fleece and dark sunglasses, she moved with quiet authority. Her heels clicked sprucely against the pavement as she made her way to the entrance, her posture regal and her expression calm but bent. Those near the windows uncurled artificially, their eyes widening as they honored her. Inside, Sandra was formally relating the commerce with Barron to Kyle, laughing vocally as she mimicked his polite tone. Can you believe he actually allowed? But her words failed in her throat as the doors opened again and Melania entered the lobby. The room fell silent. Discussion stopped. Medial judgment and the faint hum of keyboard typing suddenly desisted. Heads turned in accord as Melania removed her sunglasses and scrutinized the room. Her aspect was direct, unvarying, as she spotted Barron standing just beyond the counter, his reverse to her. Barron, she called, her voice clear and composed, cutting through the stupefied quiet. He turned, his expression softening slightly as he saw his mama approach. Mama, he saluted her, his tone measured but carrying a hint of relief. Melania reached his side in many graceful strides, placing a reassuring hand on his arm before turning her attention to the counter. Her piercing aspect landed on Sandra, who was now visibly flustered, her earlier confidence worsening under Melania's scrutiny. Is there a problem then? Melania asked, her voice calm but establishment. The question was not directed at Barron. It was easily meant for Sandra. Sandra stammered, her cheeks flushing as she climbed for an answer. No ma'am, she said eventually, her voice slightly above a tail. Yeah, we just Kyle, still seated behind the counter, looked inversely uncomfortable. He shifted nervously in his president, avoiding Melania's aspect. As he fumbled with a mound of papers, Melania did not raise her voice, but the weight of her presence was palpable. I was under the print that this bank prides itself on professionalism, she said, her words deliberate. But from what I have seen, that standard wasn't extended to my son. Sandra opened her mouth to respond, but snappily closed it again, easily doubtful of what to say. The other staff members watched in stupefied silence, their earlier smugness now replaced with a blend of embarrassment and fear. Melania took a step closer to the counter, her expression undecipherable. Maybe you did not fade him, she continued, her tone sharper now. But that's no reason for treating anyone, especially an implicit customer, with discourteousness. Sandra swallowed hard, her hands pulsing slightly, as she tried to recapture her countenance. I did not realize. She began, her voice running off. No, Melania fitted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. You did not bother to realize. And that's the issue, but what came next would ensure that Sandra and Kyle would no way forget this hassle or its consequences. The silence in the bank was blaring. Sandra's face had turned a deep shade of red, her earlier smugness replaced with visible discomfort. Kyle, who had been so quick to mock Barron moments ago, now looked like he wanted to sink into his president and vanish. Indeed, the other workers, who had been brooding and snickering earlier, stood firm at their stations, their eyes zipping nervously between Melania and their associates. Melania held their aspect, her expression unyielding. You represent this institution, she said, her words precise and cutting. Your jest reflects not only on yourselves, but on the bank as a whole. If you cannot offer introductory courtesy and professionalism, maybe you're in the wrong line of work. Sandra opened her mouth, but no words came out. Kyle shifted awkwardly, glancing around for backup, but none of the other staff dared to intermediate. The atmosphere was thick with pressure, and every second of silence felt like an eternity. I would like to speak with the director, Melania continued, her tone calm, but leaving no room for argument. Now Sandra dithered her hands, fumbling with the computer mouse in front of her. The director is Ant, she started, but Melania's sharp aspect stopped her medial judgment. Also, I suggest you find them, Melania said coldly. I'll not leave until this is addressed. Reluctantly, Sandra jounced and hastened off toward a door pronounced operation. The other staff watched her go, their faces a blend of embarrassment and dread. Kyle, meanwhile, fascinated himself, pretending to sort paperwork, though his shaking hands betrayed his jitters. While they awaited, Melania turned to Barron. Are you all right? She asked vocally, her address shifting in an instant, from commanding to motherly. Barron jounced, offering her a small smile. I am fine, he replied, but thank you for coming. Melania gave his arm a reassuring squeeze, before turning her attention back to the counter. The other guests in the lobby, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, began brooding among themselves. Some looked sympathetic, others intrigued, but all sounded charmed by the quiet drama playing out before them. Twinkles latterly, Sandra returned, running behind a middle-aged man in an Argentine suit, who looked flustered, but determined to smooth effects over. His name label linked him as Michael L., branch manager, Mrs. Trump. He began, extending a hand that Melania did not take. I unfeignedly apologize for any vexation. Please let's step into my office to bandy this. Melania did not move. What needs to be bandied is the jest of your staff, she said forcefully. My son came then to open an account, and was met with sport and discourteousness. Tell me, is this how you train your workers to treat implicit guests? Michael's face turned pale. Of course not, he stammered. This is inferior. I assure you will take immediate action. Melania raised an eyebrow. Immediate action, she repeated, her tone skeptical. I hope that means further than empty pledges. Michael jounced hastily. Absolutely. I will handle this tete-a-tete. Please allow me to make this right. Melania studied him for a moment before eventually seesawing. Good, because if I ever hear of this passing again, I'll ensure that everyone involved is held responsible, including you. Michael swallowed hard, seesawing again. Understood. As the battle came to a close, the staff's faces were etched with shame and remorse. They had undervalued Barron, judged him grounded on their own impulses, and now set up themselves, facing the consequences of their conduct. But the assignment was not over yet. Melania had one final communication to deliver. Before leaving the bank, the room remained tense, as Melania turned her aspect back to Sandra and Kyle, who were now visibly shaken. Their earlier bravado had fully faded, replaced by the consummation that their conduct had not only been unskillful, but had potentially jeopardized their positions. Melania took a deliberate step closer to the counter, her voice steady but firm. Respect is an commodity you widely offer, grounded on appearances or hypotheticals. She said, her words directed at the entire room. It is a reflection of your character, not the status of the person standing in front of you. Sandra's hands quivered as she gripped the edge of the counter, while Kyle looked down at his office, avoiding eye contact entirely. Melania's presence was glamorous, and her words carried the weight of experience and authority. The guests, who had been still observing, were now seesawing in silent agreement, their expressions reflecting a blend of admiration and blessing. "You know who's standing before you," Melania continued, her voice growing softer but no less poignant. "Whether it's my son or someone without a notorious last name, every existent deserves to be treated with quality." Barron, standing still by her side, glanced at her with a hint of pride. He had grown used to the scrutiny and hypotheticals that came with his family name, but his mama's unvarying defense of him in this moment reminded him of the values she had always inseminated in him: respect, grace, and standing up for what is right. Michael, the branch director, stepped forward, eager to diffuse the pressure further. "Help me, Trump, please allow us to make this right," he said, his tone humorless. "We'll ensure this no way happens again. And Mr. Trump, we'd be recognized to help you in opening your account." Moment. Melania gave him a pointed look, her expression softening only slightly. "See that you do," she replied. Turning to Barron, she asked, "Would you like to do?" Barron dithered, glancing compactly at Sandra and Kyle. They looked hugely defeated, their earlier confidence reduced to nothing. He also turned back to his mama, a small smile lugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yes," he said simply, as Michael tete-a-tete attended Barron to his office. Melania turned one last time to address the staff. "Let this be an assignment," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "No way underrate someone. Grounded on your own hypotheticals. It's a mistake you will not want to repeat." With that, she followed Barron, leaving Sandra and Kyle standing in stupefied silence. The other workers changed uneasy ganders, and the guests began grunting among themselves. The entire bank sounded to exhale all at formerly, the pressure eventually breaking. But indeed, as the doors to the director's office closed, the weight of the assignment dallied in the air, a memorial that respect and modesty should no way be voluntary. Inside the director's office, the atmosphere was quieter, but no less reflective. Barron sat across from Michael, who strictly reviewed the paperwork, his hand still slightly unsteady. Melania stood hard, her composed address unbroken, as she observed the process. Despite the earlier pressure, her presence now felt less like a battle and more like an assignment being communicated. As Michael handed Barron a pen to subscribe the final document, he dithered for a moment, looking up at the director. Barron's voice was calm but deliberate. "I hope this is a literacy experience for everyone," he said, "because how you treat people says further about you than it does about them." Michael jounced, his expression sincere. "You're absolutely right," he admitted, "and I am deeply sorry for the way you were treated." Moment. "It will not be again." Barron finished subscribing the paperwork, also stood and extended a hand. Michael took it, his grip establishment, though it was clear he felt the weight of the moment. Melania offered a small nod of blessing before turning to leave with her son. As they exited the office, the lobby sounded to have converted. The formerly dismissive staff now avoided eye contact, their postures tense with embarrassment. The other guests, who had witnessed the entire fire, offered subtle nods and encouraging smiles as Barron and Melania walked toward the exit. Just before stepping out, Melania broke. She turned back to the staff, her aspect sweeping across the room. Moment was about further than just an account. She said it was about integrity. Flashback that the coming time someone walks through those doors without staying for a response. She turned and walked out with Barron by her side. The glass doors closed behind them, leaving a bank full of staff and guests, reflecting on what they had just witnessed. Outside, the black SUV awaited, its motorist stepping out to open the door for them. As Barron climbed in, he turned to his mama. "You did not have to do all that," he said with a small smile, though his tone carried a note of gratefulness. Melania smiled vocally, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's not just about you," she said. "It's about tutoring people to do better for themselves and for others." The SUV pulled down, leaving the bank and its staff behind, but the impact of the hassle dallied long after they were gone. For Sandra and Kyle, it was a stark memorial of the troubles of prejudice and the significance of treating every existent with respect anyhow of their appearance, or hypotheticals about their worth. This story is not just about Barron or Melania. It's about all of us. It's a memorial that our conduct and words matter, especially when dealing with others. Judging someone grounded on appearances or preconceived sundries not only hurts them, but reveals our own failings. The assignment then simple. Treat everyone with quality, because you know the story behind the face standing in front of you. If you believe in standing up for respect and fairness, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And do not forget to subscribe for further stories that inspire change and understanding. Let's make kindness the standard, not the exception.